Hello, my name is Ethan Hewlin. Like you, I live in a world that never stops moving. Also, like you, I have stories. These are my stories, the true stories of a tryhard. Welcome back to True Stories of a Tryhard. I am Ethan Hewlin, and this week I have a very special guest. I am joined by the one and only Casey Winters. He is one of the hosts of the podcast Hello from Elsewhere. He is a new to this world psychologist and a pretty great dad. So, Casey, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate it.
Now, Casey, the reason I asked you to be on this particular episode is because a while back I saw on your Instagram you posted something about the topic at hand, which is imposter syndrome. So, what's your experience with that?
Sure. Maybe just a little bit of a background. I'm a grad student currently and in a school psychology program. So school psychology is a little bit different than traditional psychology. So I'm not like diagnosing people. It's more like trying to find out what help kids need to succeed in education. So whether that's special education or not. But so being in grad school, it's just pretty stressful, and been doing it for a while, and then I've started my internship this past year, and so that Instagram post you saw was me. I had posted a picture of my nameplate. It said Mr. Winters, psychologist, and it was on my door at the school. And I was just feeling like, I saw that and I was just feeling this intense, like, oh, I'm a total imposter. And imposter syndrome is like this feeling that you're a fraud and at any moment someone's going to discover you, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I've just been feeling that a lot lately, I guess.
So, like, have you felt this way before? Have you had any previous experience with this?
I've been feeling it probably since I started grad school. I started grad school quite a few years ago. I was going to go into a different program. I was going to go to school counseling, and then I sort of transferred that and went to school psychology. So it's ended up being a lot longer period of time being in extra schooling than I had planned. And if you look into imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, they often say that it's pretty common among grad school students. And not that if you're not in grad school you can't have it, but yeah, I've been feeling it for a while. It's just been, I feel like it's been getting kind of worse and worse the last couple of years, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, and just be as real as you want to be with me and with my audience, because I want to create kind of a space where people can, be who like take off the mask per se that we all wear when we're out in public. So, that being said, this is from the American Psychological Association. This is from a report from 8 years ago. It says approximately 70% of people will experience at least one episode of imposter syndrome in their lives. So what's your reaction to that? Does that seem accurate to you? Does that seem...
It does, honestly. I think that, well, the thing about imposter syndrome and why some people call it imposter phenomena is that it's not an actual mental disorder. Like the DSM, the manual of mental disorders, doesn't recognize it. It's more of a thing that a lot of people might experience at some point in their lives, but not for the whole period of their lives. So honestly, it's one of those things that the more I talk about it with people, the more that I realize that I think it's a pretty common thing among most adults. Like the more you're open about it, the more I realize that people will say that, yeah, I kind of experienced that as well. So like one story I have is I was talking with my friend who is a dentist, and I had been explaining how I was feeling, like, oh, I'm not really a school psychologist. I feel like a fraud, and he had said, and I had mentioned that phrase. It's like I've got total imposter syndrome, and he was like, "Oh, imposter syndrome," and he had realized that that was something he had totally gone through in his schooling experience as well, and he just didn't have a name for it. And I think it's one of those cases where if you name it, you can tame it, kind of a thing, and you realize that it's a real thing.
Yeah, definitely. So listeners, I am an Eagle Scout, and I've been an Eagle Scout for almost 3 years at this point. And when I got it, I wasn't sure at first if it was actually real. Like I thought that I had somehow cheapened my own experience in the project that I did, which was just making this little brick path at a church that was close to where my troop was meeting at the time. And I got it from a friend of mine who, that was his church. This is his pastor that wanted it done. And I kind of felt like I hadn't really achieved what most Eagle Scouts get out to do, because I've heard, and I continue to hear about these Boy Scouts who will set up charities, or they'll build these giant gardens or something like that for in remembrance of people, or just so people can have a place where they can congregate. And it just felt like what I had done basically didn't matter, and that if people found out, to me seemed like what little effort I put into it, that I would just that what I had worked so hard to achieve would be taken away from me.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard thing to handle, and it's one of those things where it kind of cycles over time or can get worse over time, and yeah, it's a tricky one for sure.
So, do you have people that you can come to with this sort of thing? Like, have you had what's your experience in dealing with this on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, the biggest recommendation I have is just talking about it honestly. So in graduate school where I'm at, we have like a cohort of students. So there's 13 of us, and we started, and when you start the program, you're all kind of putting on airs a little bit, like putting on a mask, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And but then the closer you get, and you just kind of build that relationship. And there was one time that we just had a group chat that we would talk about, like, homework assignments or whatever we needed to talk about.
Yeah.
And one time I had just mentioned on there, does anyone feel like they don't actually belong? And I didn't use the word imposter syndrome, or the phrase, but I sort of expressed how I was feeling about it. And then everyone was just saying like, oh yeah, I totally felt that. And it ended up like not only helping all of us deal with that imposter syndrome, but we also grew closer together as friends and as a cohort. And it all came down to just being willing to talk about it. I'm sure there's other things you can do, but yeah, just having people to talk to about it, and then you realize when you're talking about it that they probably feel that way about something in their life as well. So
Yeah. And that's why I think self-advocacy is very important, because if you don't speak up for yourself, who's going to do it? And that's
right.
and being able to have friends to come to with that sort of thing is a very, very good thing to have, and I'm glad that you have that. But
Yeah, and I would even recommend talking to not all, like, definitely talk to your peers. That's the biggest thing that helped me, but also talk to whoever your mentors or supervisors or your bosses, because chances are that they, like, every time I've mentioned it, like, I feel kind of like I don't belong, or like I'm not really qualified. They'll say, I've been doing this for years and I still feel that way sometimes too. So I think it's one of those things where it's just part of being an adult, is realizing that no one really feels like an adult, at least part of the time.
yeah, I mean, does the fact that your superiors still feel that way, does that give you any comfort, or does that just make you more nervous?
Oh, I think for me, it gives me comfort. I don't know that it's long lasting comfort because I just get in my own head, a few days later. But at least in the moment, momentarily, it gives you a little bit of comfort to realize that most people are feeling this way. And like that study you said, 70% at least are feeling that way. So,
And also, like, I recently graduated from high school, and I've been going through this for the past 4 years, and it's what I knew. Like, I've been doing it for forever, and to feel like it's all suddenly coming to an end was just like, wow, did I really get through all of this? Like, what just happened? Like, where did
right.
this all go? Honestly, it's graduating from high school like I can't say that I have as much life experience as some people, but like even with the life experience I do have, I feel like it is still um, valid for people my age and younger to still experience these kind of things. And I feel like sometimes people who are older than us will kind of discount our opinion based off our age. Like, what do you
Yeah.
what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's important just to validate people's feelings, because this is definitely it's just rooted in anxiety, and as you know, and as your listeners know, anyone can experience anxiety, no matter their age, young or old, and I think that anyone can experience these feelings of feeling like a fraud in something, and it's no different feeling like you're an imposter, you know, graduating high school or getting your first job versus um, you know, being much older. And um, I guess what I'm trying to say is that this usually arises when you're going into something new and some sort of new endeavor, and that can happen when you're young or it can happen when you're old.
Yeah, I I know there's something about starting something new that is just it can be nerve wracking. Not only for the reason that it's the unknown, and I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of is the fact that they don't know like what's on the other side of whatever they're about to experience.
Right, for sure. And then once you're through it and you look back and you realize how important um, just having that courage to go through with it was. Um, yeah.
So in a different article that I read, I found that it is more common for women, especially in the corporate world, to experience imposter syndrome more than it is for men. Do you have any insight into either like, women you know personally or just women that you interact with that feel like that?
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's probably more common in women. I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to bring that up as well because it's hard. I am a, straight white man. I'm fairly privileged, and so um, in my cohort, for example, of people in graduate school, um, the majority are women, and one of the other men doesn't experience this at all. He's, as far as I know, he's very just kind of go with the flow, and he's good, and he doesn't have a lot of anxiety. Whereas a lot of the other women, which are varying ethnicities and races, they do experience this for sure. And even I found myself feeling more comfortable with talking to them about it than the men. And even like my superiors, I have mentors that are women and mentors that are men, and I tend to go to the women to talk about it with. And it's not really something I consciously think about, but I definitely do it now that I think about it.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I feel like it is more comfortable for me to come to women with problems that I have, whether it's my mom, my girlfriend, my grandma, just the women in my life. I feel like I can talk to them easier about the problems that I'm having. Does that resonate with you any?
Oh yeah, for sure, 100%. That's me. Definitely, that's definitely me. I've always felt that way. I've always felt more comfortable, not even just talking about problems, which I am, but just being myself. And I think that, and this is a totally different track probably than imposter syndrome, but just that so many men are all about like competition,
Mm-hmm.
and it's dangerous and it's toxic, and I don't like it. And it's I don't feel that way around most women. I feel like I can just be myself and they're accepting, and um, yeah, I don't know if you feel the same way.
Oh, most definitely. Like, some people, when they first met me, they thought that I was gay, which I'm not, but they thought that I was gay because a lot of my closer friends are female, and
Right.
that just tends to be the case with um, guys who are part of the LGBT community, and through getting to know me a little bit better, they found that that was not the case. But I don't think it's a bad thing for men to have platonic relationships with women.
No, for sure, I agree. I think it's a dangerous thought to think that men can't be just friends with women, and if they are, then they're gay, which isn't. Yeah, I've experienced that, and maybe on a smaller level than you have, but yeah, that's a really hard thing, and it's a societal thing that's really hard to break through, I think.
It is unfortunate because I'm like you. I'm a straight white man who also happens to be a Christian, which is a lot of um, which some people look down on because of what people who claim to believe the same things as me have done or do, and it is unfortunate that someone can hear what I say and stereotype me as a Bible thumping Quaker and not look past that and see me for who I am.
Right, for sure. It all comes down to those boxes that we either put other people in or put ourselves in, and like I said earlier, there's healing to be found in like naming the issues you might have, like anxiety, or I have a lot of anxiety. It's not just imposter syndrome, but I also have a history of depression, and so these things are like, in some ways for me comforting to put myself in that box, but also they don't define me. So it's hard to find that balance of putting ourselves or other people in those boxes, and it does not just mental health, but like you said, religion and gender and sexual orientation and all these things are important parts of who we are, but they individually, those things don't define us, if that makes sense.
Yes. It reminds me of another podcast that I listened to called Ear Biscuits. One of the hosts on that,
Mm-hmm.
Rhett McLaughlin, recommended a book. I don't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but there's a certain phrase in there that says, "We are Stone Age hardware running modern day software," and
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's why stuff like that's why those boxes exist. It's because we as humans don't know any other way to process
Right.
the way that others how others are and how they interact with the world.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, you can find some comfort in them, but it's dangerous and toxic if we're relying on those boxes, especially if we are passing judgment on them for other people.
Definitely, definitely very dangerous. So moving back to imposter syndrome. So what other achievements besides grad school have you doubted because of imposter syndrome?
I feel like most things in my adult life, sadly, I feel like a fraud in them. I I am a dad, but sometimes I don't feel like I'm qualified to be a dad, or um, a college graduate, or I've worked varying jobs, and yeah, I think well, and even as a podcaster, even I often feel like an imposter, and I don't know if it's one of those things where I'm just trying a lot of new things, and I'm in the grand scheme of things still fairly young, and so that I'll sort of grow out of those and get comfortable and more confident, or if it's something I'm going to deal with for a long time. I'm not sure. It's kind of in process.
Do you think you ever truly get over imposter syndrome, or do you just get used to the fact that it's there?
Yeah, or maybe you give up on, because imposter syndrome is all about that feeling that someone's going to find you, and maybe after a certain amount of time you realize that no one's discovered it, so they never will, I guess. I don't know. That's a hard question. I don't know if I can answer it.
I guess I'm just really good at asking questions because a couple episodes ago I stumped my guest as well. So here I am making my way in the podcasting world by asking the hard questions. But that's kind of what this is for. This is asking the hard questions and getting the answers, which I hope to bring some people solace, and I hope that being open with it will decrease the stigma of having to wear those masks. Kind of bring back that analogy.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what does a Casey Winters in public mask look like?
Oh man, I'm a pretty shy person, and I have a lot of social anxiety, so I'm just pretty calm and kind of fade into the background a little bit, which isn't always beneficial, to my job and what I'm supposed to be doing. And so much of my job is being an advocate for the mental health of children, and like one-on-one with the kids. And it goes back to how I guess how open I feel with women. I tend to feel more open in myself with kids, whether it's my own kids or the students that I work with. I do a lot of group counseling with multiple kids, and I feel much more myself around them versus when I get into a meeting with, so-called adults. Even though I'm an adult, I still feel like an imposter adult, and so I kind of fade away and kind of just quiet. I'm just quiet.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. Even as a kid, I was pretty shy. I never really wanted to interact with others. It's always been hard for me to make friends, and I just kind of sit back and watch. I'm more of an observer than anything else, and
Right.
I've taken multiple personality tests that prove that. So, even this podcast itself is me trying to come out of the woodwork and be more of an advocate for myself and others.
Right.
Which was pretty hard initially, but it is getting easier the more that I do it. And
Yeah, I was going to ask, just with your anxiety, if even these Skype calls, if they're difficult for you, and scheduling them and all that.
yes, and I need to get a better listeners is a little behind the scenes. I need to get a better handle on getting my guests on here because so far the week by week basis has worked out, but I feel like that's not going to work out the more that I do it, and the more busy my potential guests can be.
Right.
So that is something that I'm working towards, and being a college student and working and other things, I just have to prioritize, which is also giving me a little bit of anxiety in and of itself because of all the stuff I have to do. And like, you've been doing this whole adult thing for a little bit longer than me, and I'm still learning how to do it. So, but
see, when you say that, my imposter syndrome brain is like, maybe I've been doing it for a while, but I'm not really good at it yet. I don't know what I'm doing, even though I'm 32,
right.
But I don't feel 32. I feel like I'm 25, 24. But so I think that's my imposter syndrome. Part of my brain is always like questioning those things, like compliments or just value judgments or whatever that are positive toward me, and part of that's possibly like perfectionism and social anxiety. It's all kind of mixed in there together, but there's always that voice in my head saying, what you're saying isn't true, but my brain is, what it's saying is true, and it's sort of pushing me down. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but
yeah, I understand where you're coming from on that. Like, are you sure you mean what you just
Right.
said? Like, am I really that good at what I do, or are you just saying that to make me feel good about myself?
Right. Like an example I have is in my graduate school program, all the professors have said, only 2 people haven't finished the program, and that's because they were just changing programs and switching to something else. No one was ever kicked out for not being knowledgeable enough, or like the professors there are just really good at cultivating good students and helping them achieve their goals. But when they say something like that, like, oh, no one's ever failed out of the program, my brain is immediately, well, I could be the first. It's just where my brain goes, and it's not healthy, but it is what it is.
No, I've been there. Like, as of right now, I'm undeclared because I'm at a community college where I can't really finish my degree. But, being a computer science major and someone who hasn't done a lot of previous computer science related stuff before, and the stuff that I want to do, I basically haven't learned how to do yet, because right now I'm just getting my gen eds out of the way. It creates a bit of social anxiety and performance anxiety within me, because I want to be able to learn how to do what I want to do, which is I want to be a defensive cybersecurity specialist. Which
It's awesome.
Yeah,
I love it.
but I do not know anything about how to code for firewalls or anything like that. I'm just learning the basic stuff, and I know
Right.
that if I fail here, it's just going to tumble from there. And it's not
Yeah.
going to be good for anybody.
Well, and there's this common thought that, because I have this all the time, and it sounds like we're in a similar headspace when it comes to school, but like this common thought that I can't go into this field and study this field because I don't know about it. And I think we have to remind ourselves the reason we're going into it is because we don't know anything about it. It's okay that we don't know anything about it yet. That's why we're going to school, is to learn it. If we knew everything about it, we'd already have the degree. That's something that, my professors have always tried to remind us, because when it comes to school, there's often, like higher education, so college and above, there's often students with similar mindsets of being perfectionists and just putting a lot of weight on their shoulders. And that's something that I do. And so that was always a good reminder from the professors that, no, you don't know everything now because you're not supposed to yet. You're learning it. That's the whole point. That's the why you're here. So
That's exactly right. And Casey, we are approaching that time. Thank you once again, listeners, for listening to True Stories of a Tryhard. You can find me on Instagram at ethan.t.hewlin. You can find me on Twitter at etphonehome. The O's are zeros and the E's are threes. You can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at True Stories Pod. Casey, where can we find you?
Sure. My personal Instagram and Twitter are at Ice Cream Manatee. And then our podcast, I co-host it with my wife. We talk about movies and books and how much we love them and their thematic resonance. You can find the podcast on wherever you find podcasts, Spotify, iTunes, and so on. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
You're very welcome.
I'll be back with more stories next week. So until then, this is Ethan Hewlin signing off.